had to hold it. Well, good morning. Thank you for coming. I'm going to give a brief update, and then I'm happy to answer questions. First and foremost, we concluded on Sunday another early voting period. We had over 740,000 Connecticut voters come out and cast their ballot. A special congratulations to a few towns that saw over 17,000 early voters: Norwalk, West Hartford, and Stamford. And I'd like to remind everyone out there that a smooth election doesn't happen by accident. So I'd really like to thank the registrars, town clerks, my staff, moderators, poll workers, who really put in so many extra hours to make sure that all of Connecticut's voters who wanted to could vote early. We've also seen over 120,000 absentee ballots returned so far. So about 37% of eligible voters have already cast their ballot. But I voted this morning. The polls are open until 8 p.m., so I encourage anyone who hasn't already voted to go out and do so. So far, we haven't received too many incidents out of the ordinary. As we've heard in the past many election cycles, we have heard about several tabulators failing this morning, but the replacements have gone in. We've heard a lot of people have called about a question about procedures, either from early voting, or they weren't sure about things like curbside voting this year. We are continuing to work with all of our fusion center partners, law enforcement, to make sure that everyone can vote safely and securely. We are monitoring our hotline, as is the State Elections Enforcement Commission. And I just urge members of the public, if they see something, to say something. The hotline is 866-733-2463. Or you can also email elections@ct.gov. And I'm happy to answer questions, and I'm sure you have some.
On the early voting, do you expect that number to keep climbing, or is that the final number?
That's pretty much, I forget the exact figure, it's like 741,000 and something, but that'll be final because it concluded, but the, they won't be tallying those votes until today.
We got a call from somebody in Southbury who said they went to vote and then they said that they already voted and they're holding their vote. Something like that seems like how would you explain what you do?
It's hard to say without actually knowing the details, but I would say early voting is new, so a lot of people are unaware. So we have in-person election day voting, in-person early voting, and absentee voting. And some people don't realize, absentee ballots under certain circumstances could have been clawed back, if you will, not the same with early voting. So I'm not sure what that exact issue was, but if anyone expects that something is wrong, they should call the hotline.
Is it expected that there will be more tabulator issues throughout the day?
Absolutely. That's why we're getting new ones next year.
Can you talk about the tallying of those early votes and how that works? Once the polls close, do those get counted first and then everything else?
So in the early voting law, ballots can be, the early voting envelopes can be opened and start counting from 6 a.m. today. So most towns have probably already started that process. I saw a hand, yeah.
Getting new tabulators next year.
Yeah.
So what, are they just kind of write down because they're old, or?
Yeah, so our tabulators are almost 20 years old. I'm sure many of you have heard me say, like, when we bought them, the iPhone hadn't even been invented yet. So, think back how long ago that was. As you know, the governor and the bonding committee and commission granted us funding last year. We entered into the RFP process, which concluded. earlier this fall. So we didn't have enough time to get the new equipment deployed around the state. But there are 9 towns in a pilot in this election with the new equipment. It's New Haven, New Britain, Southington, Hamden, Glastonbury, Wethersfield, Rocky Hill, South Windsor, and Vernon.
Have they been working well so far today?
Yes, they have been.
Was that the issue in Ansonia as well? Was that just kind of a tabulator that wasn't working?
Ansonia, it wasn't the tabulator that wasn't working. I believe the memory card wasn't working, so they had to swap it out.
And so for those folks in like South Windsor and Ansonia that were inconvenienced by that, so what was the process like?
Sure. Every town has an emergency process, so if a tabulator does fail, that's expected and planned for. Every tabulator has an auxiliary bin that is also secure, so voters can put their ballots into that bin, and then at the end of the night, they're retrieved and run through the tabulator by the election officials. Some people prefer not to do that, so they're usually given guidance. You can feel free to deposit it, wait for a replacement machine to be brought online, or I shouldn't use that language, it's not online, but to be started, or they can come back at another time, and it's up to the voter to select what they're most comfortable with.
It sounds like you think things are going relatively smoothly so far. Do you think early voting impacted that? Because obviously, what is it, over 700,000 people already cast ballots?
Yeah, you know, I actually think it's just a product of so many people working so hard to make sure this year went smoothly. We have certainly been on high alert, making sure that some of the things we've heard about in other states aren't happening here, and everyone has been prepared, and I think it's going smoothly because of that preparation.
Do you have any sense on how many people have voted at the actual polls today so far? Do you have any?
I don't, because they're not required to be entered, so there's no way to know unless you go to every precinct and tabulator and read that number.
Can you comment on the human error made in North Stonington?
That's a great way to phrase it. Whenever humans are involved, human error is possible. You know, it's really unfortunate that despite, I can't even tell you how many hours of training and handbooks and office hours and an emergency hotline, that human error was made, but it was. I do appreciate all of our partners coming together very quickly to try to solve that issue. And I know, I haven't gotten the latest number today, but of those some odd 1,100 voters impacted, I know as of Sunday night, about 900 of them were accounted for. Either they had already come back or they had scheduled that they would be back today.
For that extra 200, what's going to happen if they can't come back and vote?
Unfortunately, their votes will not be counted.
And kind of with this same mistake, do you think the state needs to consider whether to implement a ballot curing process?
Yeah, I think there definitely should be a ballot curing process if we do it this way again. Part of the reason people keep asking me, like, how come there's an envelope and how come we're not using the tabulators? It was decided in sort of 2022 going into 2023 that because our tabulators were not as reliable as they could be, we didn't want to risk all of the extra movements. Some towns wouldn't have had enough backup tabulators, and if 1 or 2 failed, there wouldn't have been enough to run early voting and election day. Now that we will have new equipment for 2025, I think the legislature can definitely look at whether, like most places, we can get rid of the envelope altogether and use the tabulator for early voting.
Secretary, did you mention in South Windsor, that was one of the towns that was using the tabulators, right? Is that correct?
No.
Okay, it was, okay.
Oh, yes, yes,
It was.
yes.
So is that one of the new ones that had a problem?
I don't know offhand. If anyone else knows, let me know. Yeah.
There was a quick issue with that in South Windsor, yep, and it got resolved very quickly.
There were also reports of tabulator issues in Terryville and Torrington. Are you aware of that? And if so, is there a plan there?
If a tabulator fails, as I said, that's expected. So the exact same procedure happens everywhere. Auxiliary bin until a new machine is started up, and then voting resumes as usual.
Were there any security issues at the polls this morning?
Not that I've heard of, no.
Obviously,
Sorry, go ahead.
something on the ballot is the expansion of no excuse absentee voting. Just kind of want to gauge some comments on that, win or lose. How are you guys reacting to it?
As a member of the executive branch, it really depends on how the legislature reacts to it. I just hope, for my purposes, I hope that most people actually vote yes or no. Part of the issue with ballot questions, sometimes they're not well advertised. Voters aren't quite sure what the issue is when they arrive. We've tried to educate people. Every polling place has explanatory text. I know in 2014, a lot of people left that question blank. So for me, a successful result is that everyone actually answers it.
Can you talk about the results,
Mhm.
in this election? I know
Yes.
on the national level, it's gonna take some time.
Yeah.
Are we expecting kind of a delay in Connecticut as well, or?
Sure, I wouldn't characterize election results as a delay. I think we have somehow gotten used to this idea that results are known on election night, which has never been the case. There's no state in the country that certifies its elections on election night, and they haven't. Here in Connecticut, registrars have until midnight, or basically 11:59 p.m., to enter unofficial data. They have until November 8th, which is Friday, to enter their official results. And a lot of people ask, like, why does it take so long? It's because this is incredibly detailed work, and we want them to get it right. And in many states, they can count absentee ballots, for example, that are postmarked by election day. So many states, have a week or 2 weeks to certify their results.
Do you have any expectation that early voting will speed up those results coming in, slow down the results, any sort of?
Here in Connecticut, where every single municipality runs its own elections, it really will depend town by town. Some of the towns I mentioned with over 17,000 early votes, I know I spoke to them last weekend, and they all have processes in place, and they expect they won't be slowed down at all. Some of the smaller towns, ironically, who perhaps don't have as many staff people, weren't anticipating it to be so popular, may actually take longer to certify.
Gotcha. One of the other questions they have is about updated voter registration spreadsheets by town. Does your office expect to be putting those out?
Update.
Voter registration?
Oh,
Like,
are
it'll
we
be up
putting
today.
out?
Yeah.
Oh, it'll be up today.
I'd also just love a comment. Connecticut's making a lot of efforts to expand voter access. Can you kind of talk about the importance of that?
Before I was secretary, I served in the legislature on the Government Administration and Elections Committee. And in that work, I just heard from so many people from all around Connecticut, every walk of life, who had an issue, whether it was a senior who perhaps had joint mobility issues, or parents of young children, or commuters, or people without reliable transportation, or students. And all of them wanted to vote, but it was problematic perhaps to show up on this one Tuesday in November. So I'm very excited that we were able to implement early voting for this election. I traveled around to many different polling locations over the last 2 weeks, and the mood was just joyful. And I saw more seniors, I saw more people with disabilities out. I was in Sprague, I believe it was, and there was an older woman. She came in, they offered her a seat, and she says, "Oh, do you have one with 2 arms?" But because it was early voting, they were able to go get a chair to accommodate her, and she sat there for 25 minutes voting her ballot. And that just wouldn't have been possible on election day with the same level of grace and understanding. And she just had all the time in the world to cast her ballot. And I think that's what increased voter access is all about, making sure that people who want to vote can vote despite their life circumstance.
How about just one or two more questions?
Earlier you mentioned the hotline that people can talk
Yeah.
to report issues. Are there any alternatives, maybe in person or methods they can do that might be quicker than calling the number?
I would say calling the number is the fastest, right? Because it gets to the experts who can solve the problem. Anyone who's having an immediate issue can always go to the moderator in the polling place, and that will also funnel up to us eventually. But a moderator can solve most problems in a polling place, such as, you know, inappropriate behavior within the 75-foot rule, or you know, questions or concerns about ballot security, etc. So always go to the moderator, call a hotline. Of course, if it's an emergency, dial 911.
So we've heard some reports of some long lines at registrar's offices because of same-day
Oh,
registration. Obviously, it's a busy day, so
Yeah.
we understand that. Any advice for people going through that process?
Be patient and get there long before 8 p.m. if you can.
I just have can you just give one last call to action to voters right now? Why they should be voting in this election? Why should they trust this process?
Sure. Every election, I think, is hugely important. Although the presidential and vice presidential positions get all the press, we also have U.S. Congress, people on the ballot, U.S. Senator, every state representative, many local officials, and a very important ballot question. Every election is important, and I encourage everyone who is eligible to vote to get out and vote before 8 p.m. tonight. Thank you.
I just want to remind everyone that we have 2 more media availabilities today, 4:30 and 8 p.m. in the same location.
Thank you.